Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling a question that I think keeps a lot of us up at night. How do companies, even the ones that just seem unstoppable, how do they fall from grace?
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? We see these giants stumble, and we think, how could that possibly happen? To unpack all of this, we're going to be turning to Jim Collins' book, How the Mighty Fall. And this book actually builds on his previous work in Good to Great and Built to Last.
Exactly. And in How the Mighty Fall, Collins lays out 5 distinct stages of decline. And I think what's so interesting is how subtle the beginning can be.
That's right. It's rarely like a sudden collapse. It starts with stage one, Hubris Born of Success,
Yeah.
where companies become almost victims of their own achievements.
Okay, so like imagine you nail a huge project at work, right? You get all the accolades and suddenly you just start thinking like you can do no wrong.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And in the corporate world, this can manifest as companies believing that their past success guarantees future wins, and that can lead them to miss like critical market shifts or emerging competitors.
And Collins gives the example of Zenith, which was once a titan in the television industry, right? And they basically ignored the early rise of Japanese television manufacturers because they were so convinced of the superiority of American brands.
Yeah, it's almost like they were blinded by their own legacy, assuming that their dominance would just last forever. But what's interesting here is that it's not just about arrogance. It's about a deeper cultural issue where questioning the status quo becomes taboo.
So then how do we, like, as individuals or within our own companies, how do we guard against this? Like, it's great to celebrate wins, but how do we stay grounded?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
I think one key is fostering a culture where constructive criticism is welcomed, not stifled. So imagine a leadership team that actively seeks out dissenting opinions rather than surrounding themselves with yes men.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to challenge the prevailing narrative, even if it means poking holes in a success story.
And it's about leaders actively seeking to learn from others, even those they might perceive as beneath them. You remember the story of Sam Walton washing dishes with Brazilian investors?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the founder of Walmart, one of the biggest retail giants, eager to learn from a completely different market. I mean, talk about staying humble.
Exactly. It really highlights the mindset needed to combat stage one hubris.
Okay, so let's say a company doesn't catch itself in stage one. This pursuit of more, when unchecked, often leads companies to stage two, undisciplined pursuit of more.
Right. And this stage often shows up in ways that might initially look impressive. Think aggressive expansion, acquiring other companies, constantly chasing those ambitious growth targets. But beneath the surface, there's a lack of strategic focus.
So you might see it reflected in things like declining profit margins even while revenue is soaring, or maybe a string of acquisitions that don't seem to make sense strategically.
Precisely. Collins uses the example of Ames department stores, which took a major gamble by acquiring Zaire, and that move ultimately backfired. They were so fixated on becoming the biggest that they lost sight of what made them successful in the first place.
It's like that friend who's always chasing the next shiny object, never stopping to appreciate what they already have.
And the contrast here is Walmart under Sam Walton, who grew strategically, always circling back to their core values and customer base. They didn't chase every opportunity that came their way.
It's almost like the difference between a sprinter who burns out quickly and a marathon runner who paces themselves for the long haul.
That's a great way to put it. So for our listeners, think about it like this. When analyzing a company, don't just look at top-line growth, look at the quality of that growth. Is it sustainable? Is it aligned with their core strengths?
So how can companies avoid this trap of more, more, more? Is it about saying no to certain opportunities, even if they seem lucrative on the surface?
Absolutely. Discipline is about making tough choices and sticking to a well-defined strategy. It's about resisting the temptation to chase every trend or shiny object that comes along.
It sounds like having a strong set of core values and principles is really critical during this stage.
Yes, it's about knowing who you are as a company and what you stand for, and being willing to walk away from opportunities that don't align with those principles, even if it means leaving money on the table.
So you're cruising along, feeling invincible, chasing growth, maybe a little too aggressively, but then reality starts to set in. There are cracks in the facade, but you're not quite ready to admit it. That's stage three, right?
Exactly. Stage three is denial of risk and peril. The warning signs are flashing, but companies in this stage, they double down on the narrative that everything is fine.
It's like ignoring that check engine light, hoping it'll just magically go away on its own.
We've all been there. And in companies, this can manifest as downplaying negative data, blaming external factors for problems, or attributing any dip in performance to just like a temporary blip.
Collins uses the example of Circuit City here. They were so focused on new ventures like CarMax that they completely missed the boat on the rising threat of Best Buy.
And it's not like Best Buy's success came out of nowhere. They were very strategically improving their customer experience and product selection, things that Circuit City could have adapted to.
This makes me think about individual projects, too. Sometimes we get so attached to an idea that we ignore the red flags because we don't want to admit we were wrong.
That's a perfect parallel. And that's why it's so crucial to create a culture where people feel safe to voice concerns and to share bad news.
So being able to step back, assess the situation objectively, and be willing to pivot or even scrap a project if necessary, easier said than done, right?
It definitely takes courage and humility. No one likes admitting they were wrong, but catching these issues early on is crucial to preventing a full-blown crisis.
And that brings us to the dreaded stage 4, where things start to get really messy, grasping for salvation. So the decline is undeniable now, and panic sets in.
Yes, the company is in a downward spiral, and leaders often resort to desperate measures, searching for that elusive silver bullet.
It's like trying to put out a fire with a water gun. You know it's not going to work, but you're so frantic that you'll try anything.
Exactly. And this can take many forms. Bringing in a savior CEO, making a risky acquisition that doesn't align with their core business, or launching a massive restructuring that disrupts operations without addressing the root problems.
Collins contrasts HP under Carly Fiorina with IBM under Lou Gerstner. Fiorina was all about dramatic pronouncements and radical change, while Gerstner took a quieter, more methodical approach.
And it was Gerstner who ultimately achieved a more sustainable turnaround. He understood that real transformation requires discipline and a long-term commitment, not just flashy headlines.
So it's not about finding a hero to save the day. It's about going back to the basics and rebuilding from the ground up.
Precisely. And that's an important lesson for anyone facing a difficult situation, whether it is a company in decline or a personal setback. Sometimes the most effective solution is the least glamorous one, focusing on the fundamentals, making incremental improvements, and being patient.
It's that classic tortoise and the hare story, isn't it? Slow and steady wins the race.
Exactly. And that leads us to a thought-provoking question that Collins raises. Why do we often assume that decline is primarily caused by a lack of innovation or complacency? Why is it so hard to accept that even innovative companies can fail?
It's almost like we want to believe there's this simple explanation. If we just keep innovating and avoid becoming lazy, we'll be fine. But as we've seen, it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Right. Many of the companies Collins studied were incredibly innovative right up until their downfall. The problem wasn't a lack of new ideas. It was a failure to recognize and adapt to changing circumstances, often driven by the arrogance and denial we discussed earlier.
So innovation is important, but it's not a magic bullet. You also need the humility to recognize when your innovations are no longer meeting the market's needs, and the discipline to pivot or even abandon them when necessary.
That's a great point. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most sobering stage of decline. Capitulation to irrelevance or death.
The name says it all, doesn't it? This is where companies either fade into obscurity, get acquired for pennies on the dollar, or simply cease to exist.
It's a reminder that no company, no matter how big or successful, is immune to failure. Collins uses a powerful analogy to illustrate this stage, a company running out of cash. He points out that companies don't die from a lack of earnings, but from a lack of cash flow.
That's a crucial point for our listeners. Even if a company is profitable on paper, if it can't manage its cash flow effectively, it can quickly find itself in a very precarious position.
Absolutely. And at this stage, companies often face a series of difficult choices. Do they sell off assets? Do they seek a merger or acquisition? Do they file for bankruptcy?
And the decision of whether to fight for survival or accept defeat can be agonizing.
Collins suggests that if a company can't articulate a compelling reason for its existence, a core purpose that goes beyond simply making money, then perhaps it's time to consider a graceful exit.
He uses the example of Zenith here. They actually had a chance to reinvent themselves with their data systems division, but they were ultimately dragged down by their legacy business and mounting debt.
It's a reminder that sometimes the best course of action is to let go. But Collins also emphasizes that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, there's always hope for recovery.
That's right. He highlights companies like Nucor and Nordstrom, both of which faced significant decline, but were able to turn things around by returning to their core values and principles.
These stories demonstrate that decline is not a foregone conclusion. With the right leadership, a willingness to confront reality, and a commitment to the fundamentals, it's possible to reverse course and reemerge stronger than before.
It's a powerful message of hope, even amidst the stark reality of corporate decline. And it brings us to a key takeaway. Understanding the 5 stages of decline is not about predicting failure. It's about gaining valuable insights that can help you avoid pitfalls, build a more resilient organization, and achieve lasting success.
And remember, even the mightiest can fall, but decline is not inevitable. With awareness, humility, discipline, and a commitment to continuous learning, you can chart a course toward enduring greatness.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's dive a little deeper into this idea of well-founded hope that Collins talks about. What does it look like in practice? How do you cultivate that hope within an organization, especially one that's already showing signs of decline?
That's a great question to ponder as we move into the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore how to put these concepts into practice, drawing on Collins' insights and real-world examples to help you navigate the challenges of decline and build a more resilient future. Stay tuned.
All right, so we have explored those first 4 stages of decline, from that initial hubris to that frantic scramble for a quick fix. But before we jump into that final stage, I want to kind of circle back to this idea of well-founded hope that you mentioned. It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all this talk of decline. So where does hope actually fit into this whole equation?
Yeah, that's such an important point. Collins doesn't want us to walk away feeling like decline is inevitable or that success is just this fleeting illusion. He argues that even when you're facing significant challenges, there's a type of hope that's not naive or wishful thinking, but it's actually grounded in a realistic understanding of the situation and a commitment to taking action.
So it's not about ignoring the problems or pretending like everything is fine. It's about acknowledging the difficulties while still believing in the possibility of a positive outcome.
Exactly. And Collins actually points to several examples of companies that were able to pull themselves back from the brink. Do you remember Nucor, the steel manufacturer?
Yeah.
They were facing intense competition and a rapidly changing industry, but they didn't panic.
Yeah, they didn't try to become something they weren't right. They doubled down on their core values, invested in their employees, and found innovative ways to stay competitive.
And that's a key element of well-founded hope, right? It's not about chasing some magical solution or waiting for a savior to come along. It's about taking ownership of the situation, focusing on what you can control, and taking deliberate steps to move in a positive direction.
It sounds like it requires a certain level of self-awareness, both at like an individual and organizational level. You need to understand your strengths, your weaknesses, the external forces that are at play, and then make strategic choices based on that understanding.
Absolutely. It's about facing the brutal facts, as Collins often says, but also maintaining a belief that with effort and perseverance, things can get better. And it's about having the courage to make tough decisions even when they're unpopular or they go against the prevailing narrative.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier, the importance of having a strong set of core values and principles. It seems like that's even more crucial during times of crisis.
You're absolutely right. When everything around you feels chaotic and uncertain, it's your core values that provide a sense of grounding and direction. They remind you of who you are, what you stand for, and why you're fighting for this company or this project in the first place.
It's like having a compass that guides you through the storm, right? It helps you make decisions that are aligned with your long-term vision, even when you're tempted to take shortcuts or make compromises that could undermine your integrity.
And it's important to remember that well-founded hope is not just about the company as a whole. It's also about the individuals within that company. Leaders need to create an environment where people feel safe to voice their concerns, share their ideas, and contribute to the solution.
Yeah, it goes back to that point we made earlier about fostering a culture of open communication and constructive criticism. You don't want people to feel like they have to sugarcoat bad news or pretend that everything is fine when it's not.
Exactly. People need to feel empowered to speak up, to challenge the status quo, and to offer their perspectives without fear of reprisal. That's how you tap into the collective intelligence and creativity of your team, which is essential for navigating those complex challenges and finding innovative solutions.
It sounds like well-founded hope is not just a passive belief. It's an active process that requires both individual and collective effort.
That's a great way to put it. It's a combination of mindset, culture, and action. You need to believe in the possibility of a better future, create an environment that supports that belief, and then take concrete steps to make it a reality.
So let's say a company has managed to avoid those first four stages of decline, or maybe they've caught themselves early on and taken steps to course correct. What does sustained success actually look like? Is it even possible to stay at the top of your game indefinitely?
It's a question that has fascinated business thinkers for decades, and there's no easy answer. Collins' research suggests that it's incredibly difficult to achieve and maintain a state of exceptional performance over a long term. Even the companies that seem to defy the odds, they eventually face challenges and setbacks.
So it's not about avoiding failure altogether. It's about learning from your mistakes, adapting to changing circumstances, and constantly striving for improvement.
Precisely. And I think one of the key takeaways from Collins' work is that sustained success is not about finding that perfect formula or following a set of rigid rules. It's about embracing a mindset of continuous learning, experimentation, and adaptation.
It's about being comfortable with uncertainty, embracing change, and being willing to challenge your own assumptions. It's almost like a paradox. The more you try to hold on to the status quo, the more likely you are to fall behind.
I love that. It's about being willing to let go of what worked in the past and embrace new ideas and approaches, even if they feel uncomfortable or risky.
This brings us back to the importance of humility, doesn't it? The companies that stay at the top of their game for extended periods are often the ones that are constantly questioning themselves, seeking out feedback, and looking for ways to improve.
And they're not afraid to admit when they're wrong or to learn from their mistakes. They understand that the moment they start believing their own hype or resting on their laurels is the moment they start to decline.
So how do you cultivate this culture of continuous learning and humility within an organization? It seems like it would require a fundamental shift in mindset, both from the leadership team and from individual employees.
That's a great question, and it's one we'll explore further as we move into our discussion of the fifth and final stage of decline. It's a stage that many companies never recover from, but it's also a stage that offers valuable lessons about the importance of resilience, adaptability, and the enduring power of hope.
All right, I'm ready to face this final stage. Let's dive in. Okay, so we've danced around this final stage of decline long enough. It's the one no company wants to face. Capitulation to irrelevance or death.
It is a stark reality. But as we've been discussing, even giants can fall, and this stage is often where the consequences of those previous four stages, they really crystallize.
It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck, you know? You can see it coming, but there's this sense of inevitability that's almost unsettling.
Yeah, that's a powerful image. And Collins emphasizes that at this stage, companies are often facing like multiple crises all at the same time. Dwindling cash reserves,
Yeah.
Mounting debt, eroding market share, a loss of faith from both customers and employees.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect where one problem triggers another and eventually the whole structure just collapses.
Exactly. And unfortunately, by this point, the options are often very limited and incredibly painful. Companies might be forced to sell off valuable assets, fire loyal employees, or even declare bankruptcy.
Yeah, it's a tragic end for companies that were once, industry leaders. Collins uses the example of Zenith here, highlighting how they ultimately succumbed to decline despite having a chance to reinvent themselves with that data systems division.
It's a reminder that even when they're presented with opportunities for change, companies can become so entrenched in their old ways of doing things that they just fail to adapt.
So what separates the companies that manage to pull themselves back from the brink from those that ultimately fade into obscurity?
I think it really boils down to a few key factors. First, there's a willingness to confront reality no matter how painful it might be. Leaders have to acknowledge the severity of the situation and be willing to make tough decisions, even if it means breaking with tradition or challenging long-held assumptions.
It's about having the courage to say, we were wrong, and to chart a new course, even if it means taking a step back in order to move forward.
Exactly. Second, there's a need for decisive action. Companies in this stage, they can't afford to be paralyzed by indecision or get bogged down in, endless analysis. They need to move quickly and strategically, focusing on the initiatives that have the greatest potential to kind of turn the tide.
It's like being in a sinking shipwright. You don't have time to debate the best course of action. You need to start bailing water and plugging holes as fast as you can.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And third, there's the importance of leadership. In times of crisis, people look to their leaders for guidance and reassurance. Leaders need to project confidence, communicate clearly, and inspire their teams to believe that recovery is possible.
It's not about sugarcoating the situation or making false promises. It's about being honest and transparent while also providing a sense of hope and direction.
And that brings us back to the idea of well-founded hope. Even in the darkest of times, there's a type of hope that's not naive or delusional, but it's actually rooted in a realistic assessment of the situation and a belief in the possibility of a positive outcome.
It's about focusing on what you can control, taking action even when the odds seem stacked against you, and never giving up on the belief that things can get better.
And Collins provides some really inspiring examples of companies that embody this type of hope. Companies like Nucor and Nordstrom, which we discussed earlier, demonstrate that even when facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, it's possible to turn things around.
Yeah, those comeback stories offer a powerful reminder that decline is not inevitable. With the right mindset, a commitment to action, and a belief in the possibility of recovery, even companies that have reached the brink of collapse can find a way to rebuild and thrive.
It's a message of resilience, adaptability, and the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome adversity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Jim Collins's How the Mighty Fall, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that understanding the 5 stages of decline is not about predicting failure or succumbing to pessimism. It's about gaining valuable insights that can help you navigate the complexities of the business world and make more informed decisions.
It's about recognizing the warning signs, taking proactive steps to mitigate risk, and building a culture of humility, discipline, and continuous learning.
And it's about remembering that even in the face of significant challenges, there's always hope for recovery. By embracing those principles outlined by Collins, companies and individuals can increase their chances of achieving lasting success and avoiding the pitfalls that can lead to decline.
So whether you're leading a Fortune 500 company, managing a small team, or even pursuing your own entrepreneurial dreams, the insights from How the Mighty Fall can provide valuable guidance for navigating those inevitable ups and downs of the journey.
And remember, success is not a destination. It's a continuous process of learning, adapting, and striving for excellence.
We encourage all of you to explore Jim Collins's work further and to apply these principles to your own endeavors. And until next time, stay curious and stay resilient.